guys, just a quick note before we get started. This artwork has been provided and voted on by my patrons. If you'd like to vote on next month's fan art poll, you can do so for only $1 or more a month on my Patreon. I'll leave the link to that in the description. So, today I'm working on some Totally Spies fan art, which I've actually only watched a bit of in my life, to the point where I had to ask my stream chat what the girls' names were. But, as you likely gathered from the obligatory Patreon promo in the beginning, this was a fan art poll drawing. Usually I like to stick to media I've seen, but occasionally I do throw a wildcard into the mix. Cause, otherwise, what's the point of me even asking if I'm just gonna draw stuff I like anyways? I definitely had an ulterior motive though when I put these girls on the poll, because let me tell you, I've been looking at a ton of Y2K and 70s fashion trends, to the point where I'm actually considering purchasing some of those stupid fluffy platform wedges and maybe a cow print miniskirt. It was for my own benefit and the sake of my wallet, really. Retail therapy during quarantine, man. It's been a rough time. So here I am just starting the second sketch layer. I tend to start recording or streaming when I already have a rough sketch in place. Rarely do I ever like going in blind for these things, since I tend to change my mind a lot about the compositions, and I also spend a lot of time looking at references. I originally thought I would do more of a movie poster / Charlie's Angels inspired layout, with the girls looking much more dynamic in the composition. Ultimately though, what I wanted to focus on was the girls' individual fashion styles and personalities. While looking for references of the fashion the girls wear in the show, I found it pretty cute, but I wasn't super blown away with what I was seeing. I wanted something a bit more representative of their individual characters instead of it looking like they all share the same tastes. Clover was a no-brainer. I gave her a cute 70s inspired pink crop top that I found on Pinterest and paired it with some flared jeans that I could easily see on someone like Bloom from Winx Club. Since she's the only character with her shoes showing, naturally I had to give her some of those ankle-breaking platforms that I've been eyeing. I had a pretty good idea of what I wanted for Sam too. I decided on a more mature look for her with a touch of glamour. I found this fluffy faux fur jacket that I absolutely adored, and I immediately knew I needed to use it. I paired it with a crop top and miniskirt set, and then some thigh-high sock boots. I even had a purse later on inspired by an old hand-me-down Juicy Couture bag I restored recently. Her whole outfit is definitely the most extra of the three, and I'm kinda living for it. Here I'm just starring Alex, whose design gave me a lot of trouble. I had to cut it from the Speedpaint, but I think I wound up drawing about 4 or 5 outfits for her, all with different variations. I knew I wanted her to have more of a spunky design, but I wasn't fully committed to the alternative look and risking straying too far from the source material. What I wound up settling on was a pair of cargo pants and a cutout halter top that I think suit her pretty well. I know it's only my second video on this channel, and maybe it's a bit of beginner's enthusiasm talking, but I've been really enjoying the editing process for these videos. I used to edit on Windows Movie Maker and a bit of iMovie on my iPad for just the transitions. It was always super clunky and it would crash all the time, making the process super frustrating for me. I couldn't even render sometimes, and I'd have this entire video done and it wouldn't export. Anyways, it's really nice having a computer that can actually handle a proper editing software for once. I cannot express how much of a difference building this computer has made, even in just my normal day today. I've always watched a ton of YouTube and wanted to make content for it, but when I was making speed paints and having so much trouble, it made me think that editing was just generally hell and something I would just kind of have to deal with in order to make the content that I wanted to make. So I'm really glad that's not the case and that I'm actually able to enjoy it. Here I'm working on the line art, which I know a lot of artists absolutely despise, but it actually happens to be my favorite part of the process. I've always said that if a gig came along that just required me to do line art and flatting all day, then I'd be really happy. The hand cramps would kill me though. For any CSP artists that are struggling, I really recommend learning how the vector layers work and the tools that go along with them. Fiddling with your stabilization settings is important too. Turn it up if you find your stroke is too shaky, and turn it down if you find your cursor lags or it's too slow for your tastes. My sweet spot is usually around 30%, but I'm working on lowering it as I learn to feel more confident in my lines. Traditional artists are kind of screwed in that regard, but try finding a good pen that works for you. I tend to press a little too hard, so I prefer a nib that's firm and sturdy. But just experiment and see what you like. Speaking of traditional art, I've been getting back into it a lot more recently. I got a new sketchbook about a month ago that I'm really enjoying filling. It's the first sketchbook I've had that can lay flat but isn't spiral bound, which I'd been searching for a while. While I really like it, as someone who enjoys using a lot of different media in their sketchbook, I don't know if I can fully recommend it. Even just standard multi-liners can be seen in the back of the next page, so I need to be really careful what I layer on it. If you guys have any suggestions for good lay-flat sketchbooks that are mixed media or just have a thicker paper, then please let me know. I will be eternally grateful. I think maintaining a sketchbook is really important, even for those of us who are die-hard digital artists. I'm a bit of a perfectionist myself, so the nature of digital art makes it so that I can pretty much endlessly tweak a piece until I'm happy with it, but there's more restraints in traditional drawing. The paper can only handle so much, so I find myself looking at more references, working in my mistakes, and thinking about page layout before I even start. Personally, I like to have a junk sketchbook to do more practice stuff in, and another to do more polished and creatively fulfilling art. As for my perfectionism, I find I really enjoy looking at sketchbooks that feel a touch messy anyways. I love it when people paste receipts from their day or little post-it note doodles. It makes the sketchbook feel really organic and similar to a journal in that regard. I also find when I look back at my own sketches, I can remember where I was and the headspace I was in at that moment, so that's how I've been trying to approach my current book. Here I'm just adding some small details like pockets, jewelry, etc. Stuff that gives each of their looks a bit more detail and interest. Clover even got a little patch and cute flower embroidery on her jeans just to give them some character. I use the accessories to make sure their outfits aren't just reflective of their personalities, but also so they go well together as a group. I added pops of color or maybe a callback to another girl's outfit onto something small like a bracelet, and I feel like it made them look a lot more cohesive altogether. Right now I'm just adding fur to Sam's coat. I switched to more of a textured pen and did small, quick outward strokes to try and emulate the fluffy look. I'd recommend getting a brush for this though if you have to draw said fluffy thing more than once, because it can get pretty tedious, especially if you're working on something like a comic. Sam's hairline is another thing I found tricky. I wasn't quite sure how to translate her look into my style, and for a moment her pulled back section of fringe looked like a weird toupee sitting on top of the rest of her hair. I erased some of the line art which helped to blend it in, but I know something I really need to work on is practicing drawing hairlines. I have a character in my comic with his hair pulled back, so it's definitely something I'm going to need to work on before he makes an appearance. Here I'm drawing the girl's eyebrows, which I always like to draw on a separate layer. I'm pretty sure this is an old tip I got from drawing with waffles, but since eyebrows are so expressive, it's nice to be able to move and position them freely without having to redraw the line art around them. I also like to recolor them to a darker version of the hair, so it's a win-win. Finally, we're on to the coloring. I use the lasso fill tool to do the basic flats, and then fix up anything I might have missed. I used to go in and drop the flat color in directly, but I find this way is much faster. As for my colors, I like to use the girls' individual skin tones to flat them, because if I miss a spot or color outside the lines, then I find having skin tones in other places is less noticeable than a random speck of green in someone's face. As for all my base colors, they're grouped together on the same layer, unless I'm unsure of what I want, in which case I merge them with the flats later. I find if in doubt, I tend to make a new layer anyways with most of what I do. It can get a bit messy, but if I'm ever not sure whether a layer is empty, I just press Ctrl T and a little box will show up if it is. One thing I try to do with all my drawings is make sure colors appear more than once in each spot. As I said earlier with the accessories, you can see me reuse colors from the girls' outfits. This is mostly noticeable with the gold parts of Alex's top also being on Sam's purse and earrings, but Sam's colors also make an appearance on Clover's shoes and Alex's bangles as well. I like to think it's less that they're coordinating outfits together and more that they just spend so much time together that their styles naturally tend to mingle with each other. I wouldn't doubt that pieces of their wardrobe may have been accidentally borrowed from one another as well at some point. No one's really able to keep track of what actually belongs to them anymore. Going back to Sam, unfortunately the technique I used to draw the fur coat and her hair made it so that I had to manually touch up the colors. It's not a big deal and takes all of 2 seconds, but it's something to make note of if you're looking to use it consistently. With their eyes, I originally made them pure white, but decided to change them to more of an off-white. I find that it usually looks a lot better if you're doing a more retro look like I was going for. Pure white tends to look more graphic, while using a slightly darker color for the sclera usually results in a look that has more depth. It also has the added benefit of being able to use a pure white for the highlights should you choose to do so. Here I'm finally getting around to drawing that aforementioned purse. I think it looks pretty cute, but I do wish I gave it more designs or some branding on the front. I think I meant to, and then I never came back to it, so unfortunately it does look a touch plain. It does have the same little heart charm that the bag I restored has though, so that's a cute little detail. Here I'm adding some patterns to Clover's outfit, and since the color I chose for the patch on her jeans was already pretty close to the base color, I found these cute little bunnies that I think made them look a little bit more homemade. I also bit the bullet and went full 70s with her shirt by adding a paisley pattern that I downloaded off Assets. I've never been the biggest fan of paisley myself, but I do think Clover looks pretty cute here. I do wind up throwing a noise filter over top her jeans, just to add a little bit of denim texture too. I really wish I avoided the patch though, and I didn't even think about it at the time, but it would make sense that it might be a different fabric. Okay, let's talk about this background because it's a bit sporadic. I started by layering a bunch of hearts on top of each other in alternating colors. Then I copied and pasted each heart and individually applied Gaussian blur to the copies. And then I converted said copies into manga tones and layered them on top of the originals. The pattern type I used for the tones? Well, of course I used hearts. So basically, it's one giant heart made out of smaller hearts that's made out of even smaller hearts. If you didn't understand half of that, then me neither. Creating this whole thing is honestly a blur, and I don't know how I did it anymore. I don't think I could reproduce it if I wanted to. Here I'm just adding more details to Sam's outfit, like her purse zipper, a white pattern on her skirt, and just some lace outlining on the top of her shirt. I once again tinkered with the idea of the top and the skirt being a matching set, but you can see what I did with that in a moment. Going into the shading, I chose to use basic multiply cell shading for this piece using a light reddish color. I did it all on one layer and simply clipped it to the flats below, so it's pretty streamlined. You can see me put a slight white tint over top of the flats as I work, and that simply helps the fill bucket tool not get confused between light colors while I fill in larger sections. One thing I struggle with when shading is finding a balance between my cel shaded style and my fully rendered painted shading. I love the look of my painted works, but it's not always time efficient and doesn't make sense for every artwork I do. With the exception of my comic, I think I'd like to try and change to more of a hybrid technique for what would normally be my cel shaded illustrations. I know a lot of artists will use gradients in place of their middle tones, and it's something I also want to try out. I think it's just a matter of experimenting with different techniques and finding what I enjoy. Since I am doing more sketchbook work recently, I'm remembering techniques I use with different mediums and thinking how I can incorporate them into my digital shading. I always really enjoy looking at my watercolor stuff since I think I pick really interesting colors, and I'd like to try and do more inventive stuff like that. Since I like to use a thinner paper too, I can't do a ton of blending and I tend to treat it like markers, so I think it might combat that over-rendered style I'm used to with digital art. It's probably just a matter of rethinking my process a bit and finding some new brushes maybe. Here I'm just going in with blush and highlights, and personally I like to be quite liberal with both since this is around the time when the piece starts looking complete and I can really see the bigger picture. Since this piece has a completely abstract background, I'm not too concerned with doing any fancy lighting. I mainly concentrate the highlights on the hair, face, and skin, or just anywhere I want to draw attention to. I do eye catch lights on a separate layer since that needs to go over the line art anyways, but I do like to add just a little bit of glow in the iris just to warm it up. I used to use an add glow layer for everything, but now I find using Glow Dodge gives everything more color and warmth to it. Now, if you thought we were done adding hearts, then think again, because of course I needed to double down on them. I add a couple random clusters of hearts using the same screen tone technique I already used with the big one in the center. And after that, I just go in and add some lighting and more screen tone hearts at the bottom. I ended up doing just a multiply layer and converted it to the screen tones like I did before. I think it looks pretty cute. I did my best to blur the background, and I ended up actually duplicating the line art and bluing? I'm keeping that in. Blurring it a bit too. Jesus. I need a nap. I'm not always a fan of blurring parts of the drawing to achieve a retro look, since sometimes I find it confuses the eye, which is why I chose to do it quite sparingly here. Then we just do a few last touch-ups, like fluffing up Sam's jacket and just adding some glitter to her top, and we are done! I had a lot of fun working on this piece. I gotta say though, working on the Speedpaint specifically reminded me just how long everything took in the first go around, since my direction was kind of undecided when I first started it. I know I did a lot more sketches than I showed. Let me know what you think of the girls, and if I should have done them completely differently, you know, let me know. Tell me everything I did wrong, please, by all means. Hey, you know what? If you'd like to influence what I draw, check out my Patreon. I'll leave a pinned note in the comments. If you'd like to vote in next month's Patreon poll, that's cool too. Otherwise, just subscribe, you know? I'm not holding you to it, but I think you should. Just saying. Okay, have a nice day. Bye.